Okay. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the second episode in our sustainability webinar series. I'm Ashley Diaz, the Bowie Sustainability Planner, and I just want to quickly go over a few tips for maximizing your webinar experience. Please mute yourself and put all questions in the Q&A box. The chat is disabled for this webinar, so I'll be moderating the Q&A box for the speakers. And I will also do a follow-up email afterwards to all participants and send relevant links and things like that. The webinar is being recorded and will be available to view afterwards as well. Now, to introduce our speakers, first up we have Bonnie Raindrop. Bonnie is a beekeeper who got involved in pesticide protection because her bees kept dying, just like over 40% of the bees in Maryland are dying. She became the grassroots coordinator of the Smart on Pesticides Coalition in 2016, which was founded and is facilitated by the Maryland Pesticides Education Network. The Smart on Pesticides Coalition is comprised of 108 organizations representing communities, businesses, healthcare providers, farmers, environmentalists, and more. The coalition works to protect Marylanders and the natural systems we depend on from the toxic impacts of pesticides, and it has been successful in passing several landmark legislative protections for Maryland. She has a lovely presentation prepared for you all on how to have a safe, healthy, and thriving yard for all creatures within it. And then we'll have Dr. Doble jump in, and he'll be available to elaborate on topics and answer questions. Originally from Germany, he received his undergraduate degree in Berlin, where he discovered his love for honeybees. He then received his master's and PhD from the University of Maryland in entomology, and today he gets to do what he loves, having his own apiary and teaching 400 undergrad students every semester at Maryland. Okay, Bonnie, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Ashley. And it's really great to be with everybody tonight. Having a healthy outdoor oasis has become even more important for us now that we're in this pandemic. And we all need sanctuary, sunshine, connection to nature, and a place to play. And you may be doing more gardening. But in making your yard more attractive, could you be putting your health at risk? If you're using pesticides, or if a neighbor is, the answer is yes. And I'm going to share some tips to help you keep your yard beautiful and healthy without pesticides. And Ashley's going to email you some links afterwards with some of the fact sheets that I'll be mentioning in my presentation. Next slide. So bees, birds, pets, people, wildlife, we all need clean water, clean air, clean food, and to stay away from poison, which is what pesticides are. Next. Lawn care and mosquito control companies would have us believe that the products they use are safe and that their services are an easy way to have a beautiful lawn or to be free of mosquitoes. But these services come at a cost that's more than just their price tag. The truth is, most insecticides, herbicides, and fungicides are toxic to humans, especially children, as well as to pets, wildlife, and beneficial insects that we need to have a healthy ecosystem. Pyrethroids and organophosphate insecticides are typically used by lawn care and mosquito control companies. And these chemicals cause brain damage to children and are linked to ADD, ADHD, asthma, autism. They cause cancer, infertility, obesity, and they weaken our immune systems. Neonicotinoids are also a highly toxic pesticide to bees, birds, beneficial insects, and now researchers are finding that they damage humans' brains just like they do with bees. And then the runoff of pesticides and chemical fertilizers into the bay cause a host of problems for aquatic food webs, including killing young blue crabs. We absorb these pesticides from food in our environment, often unknowingly, until we hit a tipping point. Besides developing these serious conditions, people may become chemically sensitive or outright poisoned. Pesticides are dangerous and we should eliminate them from our environment whenever we can. Next slide. There are safer ways than using chemicals to have a healthy lawn. Starting out with our soil. Healthy soil grows healthy grass and plants. So to have healthy lawn, you want to test your soil and find out what's missing and add it back. And that might be minerals or organic amendments. You want to pick the right grass for your soil conditions so you're not waging an uphill battle. You want to fertilize to increase turf density and prevent weeds, and buy or make organic compost or use natural, slow-release, non-phosphorus nitrogen. For weed control, you can spread corn gluten. It's a natural pre-emergent weed deterrent. And you can set your mower to just chop the top 1/3 of grass blades. Taller grass will prevent weeds. You want to keep your mower blades sharp because dull blades will injure your grass and make it vulnerable to pests and diseases. Ashley will mail you a link to our Healthy Garden Guide for a lot more tips along these lines. Next slide. If you use a lawn care company, or even if you don't, go organic for your lawn. It's doable. Even our State House grounds in Annapolis uses organic lawn care. You can ask your lawn care company if they have an organic program. In your area, KW Landscaping and Air Lawn Care are organic lawn care experts. Natural Lawn and others have organic programs too, so you can Google for that. Unfortunately, lawn care companies tend to minimize the risk of pesticides, and they throw around terms like natural to sound more appealing. You've really got to ask questions. If they're recommending treatments, you want to get the product sheets and look up the chemicals. And really beware of claims of using integrated pest management or IPM. This term means that mechanical practices and least harmful controls are first-line tactics. But these days, the pesticide industry has co-opted this term. So when they tout IPM, it also means to them pesticides first, and then they'll say, oh, we only use as much as we need to, and that's not IPM. Ecological pest management is a new standard that you'll be hearing a lot more about in the coming years. The bottom line on this is that we have to change our mindset. A perfect lawn is usually a toxic lawn, and our goal should be an organic lawn. Next. Lots of practices and products are now labeled bee safe, and that's great. Bees pollinate 1 in 3 bites of food that we eat, and they're the most nutritious bites. There are fruits and vegetables. But Maryland is losing 40% of its honeybees each year, which is unsustainable. And Dr. Dobel is going to talk a lot more about this terrible trend and what we need to do to turn the tide. But step one is we can start in our own backyards, and we can really start to protect the critically important world of insects. Next. We need pollinators, and pollinators need flowers, but not all flowers feed pollinators. You can beautify your yard with flowers that do. Perennial herbs, native plants, flowering trees and shrubs also provide food for bees, birds, and butterflies. You can ask for suggestions at your nursery, but make sure that the plants and seeds you buy aren't pre-treated with pesticides. You want to try to buy organic seed whenever you can, and you want to ask your nursery about their policy on buying treated seeds and plants. Many plants are pre-treated with neonicotinoids or neonics, and neonics are systemic. So a single application is taken up into every cell of the plant, and that plant will express that poison, nectar, pollen, and fruit for years to come from just one single application. The neonics are largely responsible for catastrophic honeybee losses. Xerces Society has a great pamphlet on this, showing on this slide, on how to buy bee-safe plants, and Ashley's email will have a link to that for you. Next. This slide shows some of the plants that bees love. An important species for pollinators in Maryland are black locust trees. Now, you would see these blooming along the highways in May, and they are largely considered to be a scrub tree. They were very important when we were more agricultural because they made excellent fence posts. But those small clusters of tiny flowers put out a huge amount of nectar. If it wasn't for black locust trees, bees wouldn't have enough food for beekeepers to have a honey crop in Maryland. Now, in our region, bees generally have very little to eat during midsummer and fall. So plant flowers that will bloom at these times. Asters and sedum are important fall flowers for bees. Next. I wonder how many of you still see lightning bugs. I mean, when I was a kid, collecting these in the evening was like the most fun thing that we had to do. And a lot of kids nowadays have never had that experience. And that's because pesticides are wiping out lightning bugs in many areas, along with everything else. To have a healthy yard, we really want to encourage beneficial insects. I wonder if anybody knows what that insect is next to the hand in the picture. Well, it's a mosquito hawk. And these insects will eat hundreds of mosquitoes in your yard. But when we use pesticides in our yards, we kill everything, not just the undesirable insect. We're going to be able to give you a beneficial insects guide in the email that Ashley will send that'll acquaint you with some of the really excellent friends we have in the insect world and the ones that, will control the bad insects for us. It's all part of nature's wisdom. Next. Maryland's Pollinator Protection Act made certain consumer outdoor home and garden products illegal in Maryland. And these are the products that contain the #1 bee killers, neonicotinoid insecticides. And this was a huge win for pollinators, and many states are now following Maryland's lead by banning these products in for consumer use. These systemic poisons remain active for years after a single application, as I said, so it makes them so much more deadly than normal pesticides and unnecessary. PG County Delegate Ann Healy led this effort in 2016 and again in 2021 to ban neonics out of consumer yard and garden products. She and Senator Cheryl Kagan are our 2021 pollinator protection champions. This year, they sponsored and passed bills to fix a loophole that some retailers were using to continue to sell the banned neonic products to the public. Passing this law in April was a huge win for pollinators, wildlife in Maryland. And the products that you see on this slide are some very common ones that typically contain neonics, and you may have them in your garden shed and your basements. Next. So we want you to check your garden shelf for these banned products. They come in large bottles and also in spray bottles, and they do last for years. Manufacturers actually instruct consumers to apply them at 500% of the amount used in agriculture. You have to really be aware that you're not going to see the word neonicotinoid on the active ingredient listed on the bottle. It's going to say something like acetamiprid or imidacloprid, most likely. There are about 7 or 8 in this chemical class. The Be Safe Plants handout that you're going to get a link to will list all the chemical names that you can look for, but these are usually displayed right on the front of the label as the active ingredient. So if you have any of these, it's really important to dispose of them safely, and that means at your Brown Station landfill. And sometimes the county will have other community drop-offs for household hazardous waste, and you can find out about that on the news, and that's another avenue. But please never pour these down the drain. Don't continue to use them, and just store them in a box until you can get to the landfill. Next. Mosquito spraying is a big threat to public health and nature. Commercial residential services and the state's nuisance mosquito spray programs actually kill off all the natural predators and create a dependence on spraying. And there are plenty of studies that prove this. One study that was done over 11 years in New York over a swamp found that they sprayed 15 times with an insecticide called Nalid. This is the same organophosphate that Maryland uses in its aerial program. The mosquito population grew 15-fold during that period. So the whole concept that we should spray our yards or spray our areas is really a completely faulty logic. It doesn't work. And besides the many health harms of the pyrethroid and organophosphate chemicals that are in mosquito sprays, our organization had mosquito spray product that's used in Maryland called Permanone 3030 tested a few months ago. The testing lab found that it was contaminated with a chemical called PFAS. PFAS is very, very dangerous. It's called a forever chemical. And the EPA said that it had toxicological significance if any of it was found in anything. And so this PFAS causes liver damage, thyroid disease, developmental issues, infertility, obesity, hormone suppression, and cancer. It's really a bad actor chemical. And mosquito sprays are not supposed to have PFAS in them at all. So we don't know what the synergistic effect of having these two chemicals together is. We can be really sure, though, that it's not good. Yesterday, I was talking to the Maryland Department of Agriculture about whether they were going to continue to use Permanone 3030 while the EPA investigates how PFAS got in it. And they said that they were going to use biomist in Maryland for their spray program instead. Now, biomist, it has the same chemicals in it that Permanone has, and it hasn't been tested for PFAS. So that's a problem. And a lot of people may be thinking, I don't want this stuff sprayed in my community. And the other issue with it is that pesticide products do not have to disclose their inert ingredients. Inerts are can be added to pesticides to make them more deadly, or to make them more toxic, or to make the pesticides spray better. There's no way for us to know, and so the public is really vulnerable to this in all these pesticide products. You can opt out of the state spray program, though, either for your house or for your community. And so we have a link to our Managing Mosquitoes Without Pesticides that gives you access to how to opt out and a lot of information about opting out. Next. So, you can do a lot to make mosquitoes go away without poisoning your yard. And we have a fact sheet on this that's a really good guide, and you'll also have a link to it. The first step is really eliminating standing water around your property. And this little diagram shows common places to check and to empty regularly. It's things like downspouts, faucet drips, flower pots, saucers, bird baths, trash cans, toys left outside, pet water bowls. And you can just dump this right on the ground, and the larva will die very shortly if they're in there. For larger and persistent problems, you can use a product called mosquito dunks or mosquito bits, and it's pictured there on your slide. And it's a totally non-toxic biocide. It really kills the larva, and it uses something called BT, which I can never pronounce correctly, but I'll give it a shot. I think it's Bacillus thuringiensis. Hartwick would know for sure. But it is natural, and it works really effectively on mosquito larvae and any other kind of larva. So I have a big standing water problem out behind my house, and I use this stuff extensively, and it really does work. And we go out after rains and we, cast this stuff around, and it really has helped cut down mosquitoes to a very manageable level. When West Nile virus was at its height, and Baltimore City tried spraying for a year or two, and they found that it didn't work. They then went to a program to educate people to eliminate standing water. And this poster was used by the city, and they, put pamphlets in that worked for the city in their paychecks, and they did just a real big push so that everybody understood this. And our West Nile problem was resolved without any more use of insecticides. You can also place an electric fan on your porch or sitting area, and not only will it keep you cool in the summer, but it blows the mosquitoes away. And then there are also mosquitoes traps that emit carbon dioxide that draw the mosquitoes away from the seating areas. So if you Google on this, you'll find that there are a lot of options out there, and with a little research, you'll find things that work really well. Next. Another thing to do is to plant these mosquito repelling plants. They're fragrant, they're pretty. Many of them are perennials, so you plant them once and they come back year after year. Often there are even culinary herbs like oregano and lemongrass and lemon balm and rosemary and the mint family. And scented geranium is beautiful, and it's wonderfully aromatic. So you can check your garden stores for lots of options like this. And again, it's something that you can Google and find a lot of information on about plants that repel mosquitoes. Next. Step 3 is to get yourself a good non-toxic organic mosquito repellent. And I'm telling you, they work. They use the the repellent power of the plants that I just mentioned. Most of them are made with pure essential oils of these plants. One in particular, oil of lemon eucalyptus, is called OLE for short. Well, it was tested by the CDC and they found it was as effective as DEET. And the CDC now recommends OLE over DEET. You can check your health food stores and online for products, or you can make your own roll-ons. I've used essential oil roll-ons that I make, and they smell great and they just work really well. Another tip is that you can up your vitamin B1 intake to 50 to 100 milligrams a day. By doing that, your body will emit this odor that only mosquitoes can detect, and they don't like it, so they'll stay away from you. And then there's always citronella candles. Next. Step 4 is just really becoming more aware of peak exposure times and when you might be encountering mosquitoes, and have repellents handy. And long sleeve pants and hats and are just good protection. And then always carrying your organic repellent is just one way of always being prepared, and you'll eliminate a lot of bites. Now, if your community is sprayed by the state's mosquito control program, I show you a link right now. You can copy down that you can download a form to exempt your community or your house from the program. And I have more information on that in the links that you'll get. So there are lots of success strategies for insect problems but we've really been indoctrinated to fear insects and to think that if we see them, we need to kill them. And what I've found is that becoming a beekeeper, I started to become much more fascinated with insects and a lot less afraid of them. And pretty soon I began to really recognize that they all play a really critical role in the web of life. They all have a job to do. They're all food for something else. And even our bird populations are declining because they don't have the number of insects that they need for the insect eaters to be able to be sustained. So for ourselves and for our families, our pets, and for all wildlife, really, there are just huge benefits to adopting a non-toxic, healthy yards approach to doing things. We live in an ever increasingly toxic world, and any way that we can eliminate poisons from our environment is a good thing to do. So I don't know, does anybody have any questions? I think maybe I have one more slide next. Yes, I do have questions. So if you have any, you can ask whenever Ashley wants to let that happen. And there's my contact information there if anybody wants to get in touch with any questions.
Thank you, Bonnie. Well, since we don't have any questions, Dr. Doble, did you just want to jump in and talk about anything that she kind of touched on and elaborate, or maybe go into more depth about bees specifically or something?
Yes, so if you allow me to share, oh yeah, it's working now, the screen, then I will do that. Hi everybody. I am Hartmut Döbel. I work at George Washington University and have been there for a while, and started an apiary. And so I kind of started research with a lot of young people. Just wonderful to work with them. I love it, keeps me young. And so they learn how to beekeep, but also do authentic research, which is really important also to instill into our young people. And so we mostly for the last few years focused on very minute doses of pesticides and on the behavior and physiology of honeybees. And so, as you all know, insecticides kill insects, but what about doses that are so small that do not kill the them? What do they do? And so we were really interested in that kind of behavior. So, and we used what's called the proboscis extension reflex. Bees stick out their tongue or proboscis, as you can see here, when they come with their antennae to sugar water. So that's kind of a reflex. They do that automatically, and we use that to classically train them with another signal. And we used a strange signal, a smell that they don't necessarily find out in nature, because we want to make sure they did not already know that. And then, you know, we kind of tried all kind of things with the bees, different pesticides and so forth. And so I want to just show you these results here. So, oh, wait a second. So here, this is the first one. So you have Imidacloprid, that's the neonicotinoid. We use this classical conditioning. And here our control bees, we conditioned them on lemongrass. They just were really, really good in differentiating lemongrass with sugar water in our trial runs. But when they had been exposed with very, very low doses of pesticides, 5% below the lethal dosage for 50% of the bees die, or even 0.05%, there were no differences in these responses, indicating that bees have forgot what we taught them. They could not remember that anymore. So that's fine. So what about herbicides? So we had this idea, let's test herbicides on this one, because they are just very, very, you know, herbicides. They're supposed to kill weeds and not insects. You know, so we use Roundup, or just the ingredient in Roundup. Bonnie alluded to it. There's some other inert products in these pesticides. We want to make sure there is some, you know, not another effect happening. So again, in the control, they were able to significantly differentiate between what they were trained on and the sugar water. But then once they were given these doses, these low doses of Roundup and herbicide, they did not do that. So that's kind of, you know, a herbicide. So you use herbicides, you use Roundup in your yards. Think about that, you know. Maybe you don't want to do that. Also, the European Union has already told all these, I guess all the countries, that Roundup is a carcinogen. So they are pulling that off the market. And thus, you know, Roundup is also not so popular in the United States, probably for a different reason, for the reason of that weeds now have become resistant to Roundup. So they're using what's called dicamba in the Midwest and in the South. So we did a study on that and also found that the sublethal doses of this herbicide has a major impact on the learning behavior of bees. So we need to be really careful there. So let me, wait a second. Let me just summarize. So we have these sublethal doses of neonicotinoid insecticides. Honeybees forget what they have learned. We also found that they are then more susceptible to parasites and cannot fight some viruses or pathogens these parasites bring into the hives. And then the herbicides also alter the learning behavior of honeybees. And then just recently we looked at what's found in soda cans. Can you imagine our apiaries in the city? In September, October, there's hardly any nectar flow from natural plants out anymore. So bees collect soda. They go into these soda cans in the trash can. Unfortunately, the high heat that we still have during these times heats up the high fructose corn syrup. something we all have properly learned that we should not use, but it's still, found in these sodas. And so that forms this hydroxymethylfurfural, and that cannot just kill bees, but in low doses even change their behavior. Normally they would cluster together at colder temperatures, and they don't do that. And so if they bring that into their hives, perhaps that's one of the reasons our bees in Washington, D.C. die so frequently in the winter. So we'll see. So bees, this is kind of your typical Midwestern journey over Iowa or Nebraska, Kansas. I spent a sabbatical time there, and it's amazing. And so we have studies that show that right there were talked about, we have hardly any wild bee species around. They're really, really important. So these yellow, it's very low numbers here. And then in the blue, the Rockies, we have a few more, and in the east, maybe in the Appalachians also a little bit. So that's kind of what we are. So we're losing our wild bees a lot. And so we don't have just honeybees, we have actually about 4,000 different wild bee species in the country. And so that's really important. So, so you may have heard, I do not know, but I want you to know that studies have been done over a 27-year period in natural protected habitats in Germany, where they use this contraption to collect flying insects in over a period of 75 years. In these protected areas, we lost 75% of insects. So here are the data, they are log transformed data. So in order to really see this, so we have, also seasonal differences, but, the later years here in yellow just have way less biomass. So that's kind of frightening. And I don't know how old you are. I am old enough that I remember when my parents went on a road trip with us that, in the summer months, it started to rain. We had to just stop and clean the windshield because nobody could just see anything through the windshields anymore because it was just that insect schmear out there. So we could buy this so-called insect sponge again. Now, if you travel, hardly anything happens. So what happens? So they're gone. So if you're so super young, that's awesome, but ask your parents or grandparents about that, because that's kind of a story they can say. And then, the next thing that came out today is Bonnie and others are fighting the pesticide chlorpyrifos. And so today we just learned that April 29th, 21, that the EPA basically did something illegal that was decided by a court. And so they have to now review this and do something about it. So that's kind of interesting, so we are always having to fight left and right. Or you may have heard about beautiful almonds. We all love them, right? Yeah, but just during Valentine's Day, for 2 to 4 weeks, 80% of all our bees are there. Not social distancing, getting all the diseases from everybody else, because that's when almonds are in flower and need to be pollinated. Big business is pollination business, but the transport may not be so super healthy, right? So, hey, this is a shout out to the audience, to Gay Williams. She was very, very important in my life as a budding entomologist, getting me started. And so learning about insects. Gay is an amazing expert. And so I'm glad you could come and join here today. So that's totally awesome, Gay. And yeah, so we have maybe 1 million plus species we know, but there's so many unknown species that we may never really discover because we are losing species that we may never have given a name on. And so these estimates come from the rate of discovery. You just project forward that rate of discovery in areas you have not collected yet, and then you arrive at these amazingly high numbers. And 30 million species versus 5,500 mammal species. That's crazy. The green here in Western Australia's land fauna shows you how abundant they are. So I want to connect with Bonnie, and so kind of interrupt or just chime in. I don't know whether that's possible, Ashley, but I really feel like if we enjoy nature a lot, like many of us have during COVID, and I hope we keep on doing that, we talk about it, and maybe more and more people will demand that we keep nature that little bit we have. Change your lawn, make it look like this. Please, even if you like that front lawn being completely grass, it kind of is like concrete with regards to water saturation. The water just runs off and ends up in the sewer. That's not really what we want to do with our precious water. So plant something differently, for example. Or, we are cleaners, we are cleaning freaks. We need to clean the leaves. And so, be careful what you do with the leaf litter. There are a lot of interesting critters living in there. And so maybe rake it just under your bushes and leave it there. So you don't have to mulch in the spring, right? So that's kind of awesome. And so, rain gardens are completely cool, especially if you still like your grass, your lawn, then add a rain garden where some of that water can go. So that would be totally awesome. And what about bee hotels? We talked about all these solitary bees, and they love hotels like this. And it doesn't have to be as elaborate. You can just take a drill and then different bit sizes and put something in a log, or any structure that you don't mind having a few little holes in, and you will see the bees are arriving very readily. That's kind of very cool. So just today, a friend of mine sent me this, basically half an hour by this. So I want to just show you this. So I hope that works. So it's just.
The video is not playing for us.
It's not playing. Well, that's kind of your technology. I don't know. So then I will skip out of that. So sorry if it's not playing. That's too bad. So anyhow, I'm going back here. Here's a link. You can see the link. You can do that on your own. But now it's your turn. What do you know about the World Economic Forum? You know what's in the name, right? And they are showing this. And you will find when you watch this 90-second clip that Holland is the second, the Netherlands, it's the second largest agricultural exporter in the world. That small country, how do they do it with so much intensive agriculture? So you would not necessarily know it if you are just visiting the cities, but go into the countryside. So that's really, really impoverished with insects and birds over there. So, and the World Economic Forum is really there to, you know, to make countries to connect, and so they can do better with their businesses and industries. And so they are getting on this right now because Holland needs the pollinators. Otherwise, they are in trouble. You know, they can't pollinate all of these things. So, all right, so let's go on with what you can do. Start a compost pile. That's pretty cool. So that helps growing better, you know, flower beds, vegetable gardens, and so forth. Oh, what about calling Congress? You know, here's the number, just call and you will be connected to operator, and then you will be asked for your zip code. You don't even have to know your representative, and you can then get connected to their office. So that's pretty cool. You know, what about eating less meat, especially if you are a big meat eater? Well, try to do it maybe a little bit less. That's not just healthy for the environment, but also healthy for us. So don't use pesticides. Absolutely not. That's why we have a garden, to enjoy nature a little bit and learn about it. So we need to be really, really good about it. The studies on herbicides, I hope that we have done, and I just gave you a tiny glimpse of that we have done at our bee research lab, just show you that, you know, you cannot even trust a herbicide doing some harm to bees. And get involved, become a citizen scientist. There are many opportunities where you can start recording, you know, maybe native bees. There are quite a few apps out there that are really good in getting you involved, and you can make recordings. And so I think that's pretty awesome too. And you know, this is, you know, we need to be totally careful of not doing just some window dressing, or, you know, pretending the house is not burning down and we are still polishing our furniture while that is happening. So we need completely new radical approaches. And that's kind of my call for that. And you are going to be part of that, I hope. So thank you. And yeah, so Bonnie and I will take any questions that you may have.
Well, Bonnie and I were kind of answering a few already, but I wanted to get your input on one. I don't have any input on this one, but Bonnie did send a link. What would you say someone should do to avoid ticks?
Ticks. Well, I mean, I don't like mosquitoes. I don't like ticks. So we are all having something really in common. You know, you know, if you think about you want to spray your pants and tuck them into socks and with DEET, you know, if I'm out in the woods where there are a lot of stuff, I cannot avoid it. Just think about what's the differences are in terms of we spraying neighbor for neighbor in our yards and using those pesticides, or you occasionally wander out in the woods and do it. But before you actually do it, you know, I don't do that just because I'm out in the woods. I need to see ticks on me. You know, you can pull them off. You know, even the DTIC, you know, you can have that thing on you for 36 plus hours. And it, even if it's able to transmit Lyme disease, you will not get any Lyme disease. And so we are also sometimes a little bit ignorant and too fearful about all of that stuff and overreact so quickly. Oh, I need to protect myself. Yeah, there are probably situations where we have to, but what about wait and see? I worked as a student in a salt marsh in New Jersey. It was my study site, and a lot of the helpers that came out and collected insects and set up the experiments, they always sprayed. And I said, I don't want any of that spray. This is just not really necessary, so there usually a breeze blows, the wind blows and keeps the mosquitoes down. So if you have long pants, you're fine. And check yourself for ticks afterwards. So if it's totally tick infested and you must go there, yeah, you may want to use something nasty, but wait and see whether you really need it. So that's my answer.
The question that just came in, do you recommend the use of bee hotels? Are these really okay for gardens and the bees?
Yeah, they're totally okay. So what we have is we don't have enough habitats for these different bee species, and so the bee hotels actually gives a few species and a few select families access to it. It's not all the different bee families will go in there, but that's actually a very first good step. And imagine you have that and you see them flying in. Oh, what a wonderful educational moment that is for children, your neighbors. So even if you only have a few and the neighbors don't follow suit, but maybe they do once they see that that's actually fun to learn about some of these other species. So I highly recommend it. Wood, concrete, straw, reeds, make it yourself. If you have children, that could be a great project to build on. And then they see they're actually coming. Can you imagine how exciting that is? That's totally awesome.
Yeah, no one said this as a question in the Q&A box, but I bet a lot of people wonder, how can people not be so scared of bees? How can they differentiate really quickly which ones want to sting and which ones don't? Because I'd imagine many people don't know that.
I totally appreciate that question. So that's bees are just very gentle, So we have, I don't know where that comes from a wrong education. I don't think it's in our genes. This idea, if there's the bee or yellow jackets flying around, they're after us. They're not after us. They're after some food. And, they will not sting us willy-nilly. They never do. If they do it, it's because we have made a mistake. We have mistreated them. We have blown at them. This oddity when they are coming to your soda can and people just blow at bees. Well, bees hate hot breath, so don't blow at them, for example. I mean, you can actually swat at them. They fly away, maybe annoyed, but they are not coming. But the hot air triggers in some bees something. And, the honeybees, the ones we have, they're not, they're not aggressive. Even the hornets and the wasps and the yellow jackets, they are not aggressive. They're just maybe after that piece of meat on our plate when we dine outside or so. But other than that, they just, and many times they also want just sugar water, those wasps, so, and they're highly, highly important. So don't think bees are good and wasps and yellow jackets are bad. No, I had a bald hornet nest 5 feet from my front porch. And so every morning I was sitting there, I saw these big, voracious looking insects coming and picking up something small. And I noticed they're picking these tiger mosquitoes or even smaller insects up from the ceiling of the ceiling is white at my front porch. They were just sticking out, and they were just searching for them and picking them up. Did I get stung once, though I was so close to the nest? No. I mean, even my post-delivery man, I had a German wasp species in my, on my porch right next to the mailbox. And so one day he had discovered that before I did. I saw him reaching from a distance, opening it up and, putting in the mail. I said, what's happening? Oh, I just don't want to disturb the bees. Did you get ever stung? No, no, no. I know they are fine if you don't do anything with them. So that's kind of cool, So yeah, no, I think it's mostly education to learn about the creatures, and so start even honeybee keeping. That's fine too. I consider them now an indicator species. Biologists may disagree, but we learn so much from honeybees. If they are doing bad, other insects are doing bad, maybe we are doing bad. And yes, they are introduced and they are non-native, but our agriculture and big orchards and the way we grow cannot do without it. We first have to change that kind of approach. Yeah.
Could you guys elaborate on what are some of the main crops that they help to pollinate? I know there's so many more than even I had imagined. The main ones that I think of like avocados and peaches. Those are things I always heard of, but maybe for the people listening, they maybe a few more examples.
Yes, so a lot of apples, plums, cherries, but also blueberries. The blueberries, that you buy that are locally grown, they are pollinated by honeybees. Although there are also native bees that do it, but our plantations are too big, so we schlepp the honeybees in there to do the pollination. So there's a lot of that stuff. And recently there was just a study done by a PhD student in Australia who for years tried to compare whether honeybees actually are bad for native bees. And the answer was yes, sometimes, but no, the other times. It was not kind of a verdict that the native bees would not make it with the honeybees. So it was just a way more mixed picture than I originally would have imagined. So in a way, that's good news for the beekeepers, but certainly there's some competition going on that the bees and the honeybees go on to wildflowers that may be preferred by some of the solitary bees, so that's, yeah, I don't know. So it's we are not done studying that. So.
If I can also add to that, if you love strawberries, you want to thank a honeybee, because those honeybees are pollinating our strawberries, our apples, pears, our grapes. Pumpkins and squash are big crops that we need honeybees for, and watermelon. And especially down on the Eastern Shore, the watermelon, squash, and pumpkin crops are really dependent on beekeepers coming in and bringing in the extra hives in order to do that. Most of the garden vegetables that we grow are taking a pollinator to do it. It might not just be a honeybee. For example, bumblebees are specialists, and they pollinate tomato blossoms better than any other kind of bee, because they have this buzzing behavior, and they're so big that they buzz all the pollen out of the blossoms very effectively. And we had an organic farmer in our coalition who lost all of her, she was selling tomatoes to Whole Foods for years from her greenhouses. And when their neighbor started putting out sunflower seed that was poisoned with neonics, she lost all of her bumblebees and her honeybees. And so she had to resort to hand pollinating her crop by stringing fishing line all through her plants in her hothouses, and then going through and trying to replicate what the bumblebees did. But of course, she didn't do it very well. They did it constantly almost, but they weren't nearly as efficient as the bumblebee. And what she told me was, for a perfect tomato, that blossom has to be visited like 15 times by a bumblebee in order to be creating a fully formed fruit. So that's really a very specialized thing. And there's special breeds, like there's a blue orchard bee that's very common in orchards and has been around a long time, but with all the pesticides that are used in orchards, they're getting wiped out. So they definitely, our agriculture is wholly dependent on pollinators, and they might not just be honeybees, they might be all these wild bees that there are thousands of them in our area, and many of them we don't even recognize. They're teeny tiny little bees, but they're pollinating our crops.
Well, speaking of that, could you touch on what are the native species of bees in this area?
There's so many.
Well, at least a few.
I'm not an expert. Definitely some of the bumblebee species. There's some scent bees, sweat bees out there. You know, they're tiny, tiny, you know, for the casual observer. If you don't look very carefully, they're, you know, so tiny you may not see much. The larger ones are leafcutter bees. They're actually awesome to watch. They cut out, you know, pieces of leaves and line their nests with that. And so if you have like these funny looking leaves on some of your plants, you may actually have leafcutter bees in your yard, which is kind of nice to know. So if that's the case, yeah, I would turn that over here to Gay, but the attendees cannot talk, right? This is too bad. So I always like to interact with, you know, when I have my classes with my students, then that's so much easier with the question and answer. But there's so many little species you have. You know, I can give you some of the scientific names mostly. That does not really help you, but look in some sandy areas in the springtime. And then, you know, any little cavity. So even, you know, something you left outside, that's the hollow space, and you may find, you know, tiny little thingy, and you may find it stuffed with a lid, and there are bees nesting in there. So that's kind of interesting. So there's so many. So just, you know, watch what's flying around the azaleas right now. You will find some bumblebees because they're in flower, and so you will see a lot of tiny bees as well around there. And then we have also introduced solitary species too. So they're also there. So it's not just the honeybee was introduced. You know, there are others as well. So I mean, there are, I don't know, hundreds, if not thousands, different species here in the wider area on the East Coast. So
Maybe I can get Gay to send me a guide and I can attach that to the follow-up email that has maybe some images or something.
well, the Sam Droege you mentioned earlier, that he's the guy who really would know so much more. He works with a lot of people together collecting these wild bees, cataloging what's around, and knows quite a bit about the status of those ones. He's the person.
Very cool. Bonnie, did you want to do this next one?
Yeah, the question about what kind of would herbs attract bees, and they absolutely would. They love things like basil, catnip, cedar, cinnamon, eucalyptus, horse mint, lavender, lemongrass, pennyroyal, rosemary, thyme. I've had the most amazing species come to my oregano plants, and they're just I will go out, because they expand every year, get a larger and larger bunch of it coming back each year. And sometimes I'll go out and I'll have like 15 or 20 different varieties of bees, from the little teeny tiny ones like Hartman is talking about to, all kinds of wasps. And of course, the honeybees love it. There's also a mint called mountain mint that's also really attractive to bees. Pretty much anything from the mint family will attract them. And there's also a herb called witch hazel, which is a really good one to plant because it blooms really early in the spring, like almost when it's hardly anything else is blooming, but it provides a really important food source for bees.
Mhm.
And some of the other little flowers would be like marigolds and scented geraniums. So, if you go into your herbs displays and look at, most of the culinary herbs would be, attractive to bees.
And then perhaps do a little bit at a time. You don't have to re-sculpt your yard in one season. Just do a little bit, see how it goes, experiment, add a little bit here, a little bit there, and that's the way to go. And that will actually inspire you to do more, And so that's, you don't always have to do like a big thing. Just a little bit helps already too.
Well, last call for questions. Give it a second. Whoop. All right, I guess if there aren't any other questions, I want to thank the panelists. Thank you guys so much for joining us, and thank you to all the attendees. It's been a really great presentation, and I will make sure I get everything compiled and send the follow-up email to everyone. And feel free to reach out to any of us if you have any further questions.
Thanks so much for having me, Ashley. It was really fun.
Yeah, it was a great
Thank you.
time. Thank you. All right, bye everyone. Have a great night.
Bye.
Bye. Hey, Bunny.
Hey, Hartman. That was great news today, wasn't it?
That was super news. Yeah. So, I mean, it's amazing